Top 10 psychological experiments that should have been illegal. What happens when science crosses the line between curiosity and cruelty? Throughout history, some psychological experiments have delved so deeply into the human mind that they ended up breaking it. These weren't just thought-provoking studies, they were ethical nightmares. From forced obedience to psychological torture, these experiments went beyond the bounds of morality, leaving a trail of trauma in their wake. And yet, many were approved, funded, and executed in the name of research. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the most well-known experiments in psychology are still controversial today, and why many experts believe they should have been banned altogether. Psychology as a field has helped us understand the mind, behavior, emotions, and mental health like never before. But in the pursuit of knowledge, some psychologists took extreme measures, sometimes manipulating, deceiving, or even endangering their subjects. Back in the 20th century, ethical guidelines weren't as strict as they are today. As a result, many researchers crossed moral boundaries that would now be unthinkable. In today's video, we're diving deep into 10 psychological experiments that push those boundaries so far, they're now widely condemned. Some of them were halted early, others continued for years. All of them raise a single chilling question: how far would you go for science? Let's begin. Number 10. The Monster Study, 1939. Conducted by Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa, the Monster Study was designed to explore the causes of stuttering. But instead of working with people who actually had speech problems, Johnson and his team used 22 orphan children, some of whom spoke normally. Half the children were given positive reinforcement for their speech, while the other half were subjected to belittling comments, ridicule, and constant correction, even if they spoke perfectly. The results? Several children developed lifelong speech problems, anxiety, and trust issues. This study was hidden from the public for decades due to its disturbing nature. It wasn't just unethical, it was outright cruel, especially since the victims were vulnerable, voiceless orphans. Number 9. The Mgrim Obedience Experiment, 1961. Stanley Mgrim set out to understand obedience to authority. He wanted to see whether ordinary people would follow orders that conflicted with their conscience. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person, an actor, unknown to them, for every wrong answer in a learning task. As the shocks increased in voltage, some as high as 450 volts, the actor screamed, pleaded, and eventually went silent. Despite this, many participants continued administering shocks just because they were told to by an authoritative figure in a lab coat. No one was actually harmed, but the psychological damage to participants was real. They believed they were hurting someone and were visibly distressed, sweating, trembling, and even breaking into nervous laughter. Critics argue this was psychological manipulation at its worst. Number 8. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. This infamous experiment led by Philip Zimbardo is one of the most disturbing case studies in social psychology. College students were randomly assigned the roles of guards and prisoners in a mock prison set up in the basement of Stanford University. Within just a few days, the guards became sadistic, inflicting psychological and physical abuse on the prisoners. The prisoners, in turn, became submissive, anxious, and emotionally broken. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It was shut down after just 6 days due to extreme emotional distress. This experiment showed how quickly people conform to roles and how power can corrupt. But the trauma it caused to participants still haunts the field today. Number 7. The Little Albert Experiment, 1920. John B. Watson, the father of behaviorism, wanted to see if fear could be conditioned. He took a healthy, 9-month-old baby known as Little Albert and exposed him to a series of stimuli: a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, none of which initially scared the child. Then, Watson began pairing the white rat with a loud, terrifying noise. Over time, Albert developed a fear of the rat, and eventually, anything white and furry. The experiment showed that fears could be learned, but at a disturbing cost. Albert was never desensitized, and Watson never sought consent from the child's mother. Albert likely suffered long-term effects, and to this day, the ethics of using a child as an unwitting test subject remain deeply troubling. Number 6. The David Reimer Case, 1960s, 1970s. This case is not only psychologically horrifying, it's heartbreaking. After a botched circumcision, David Reimer was raised as a girl under the guidance of psychologist Dr. John Money. Money believed gender identity was purely a result of upbringing, not biology. So, He convinced David's parents to raise him as Brenda and subjected him to repeated therapy sessions, many of which were invasive, humiliating, and unethical. David never truly identified as female and eventually transitioned back to living as a man, but the damage was irreversible. David struggled with depression and trauma for years, eventually dying by suicide. This case is now cited as a textbook example of psychological overreach and abuse of power. Number 5. The Landis Facial Expressions Experiment, 1924. Carney Landis of the University of Minnesota wanted to determine whether people make universal facial expressions. So he brought in college students, painted lines on their faces, and exposed them to various stimuli, like smelling ammonia or looking at pornography. But the most horrifying part came when he handed them a live rat and asked them to decapitate it. If they refused, he did it for them, without anesthetic. The majority of participants reluctantly followed his command. This experiment offered little valuable insight into human psychology, but it did reveal something chilling. Many people will commit horrific acts if they're pressured in the name of science. Number 4. The Well of Despair, 1960s. Harry Harlow is known for his work with rhesus monkeys, but one experiment stands out for its cruelty. Harlow placed baby monkeys in what he called the Well of Despair, a dark, isolated chamber with no social interaction for weeks or months. The results were devastating. The monkeys became severely depressed, withdrawn, and emotionally broken. Some never recovered. Harlow claimed he was studying the nature of depression, but critics argued that the experiment was unnecessarily brutal and offered little benefit to justify the suffering it caused. This experiment helped spark major reforms in animal research ethics, but the emotional damage inflicted remains a haunting reminder of unchecked scientific ambition. Number 3. The Aversion Project, 1970s, 1980s. In apartheid-era South Africa, military psychiatrist Dr. Aubrey Levin conducted a disturbing campaign to cure homosexuality among conscripted soldiers. Known as the Aversion Project, it involved forced chemical castration, electroshock therapy, and even lobotomies. Many of the victims were teens, and many never consented to the so-called treatment. The goal was to recondition sexual behavior through pain and shame. This program not only violated human rights, it inflicted irreparable psychological and physical trauma. It is now widely recognized as one of the darkest episodes in the history of psychiatry. Number 2. Project MKUltra, 1953 to 1973. This CIA-led mind control experiment sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but it really happened. In the height of the Cold War, the US government launched MKUltra to explore ways to control the human mind. This included administering LSD, electroshock therapy, and hypnosis, often without the subject's consent. Participants ranged from prisoners to hospital patients, and in many cases, they had no idea they were being experimented on. One man, Frank Olson, died after allegedly being dosed with LSD without his knowledge, leading to speculation about whether he was murdered to keep the project secret. Decades later, MKUltra was exposed, leading to massive public outrage and a formal government apology. But the full extent of the damage remains unknown, since many files were destroyed. Number 1. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, 1932 to 1972. Perhaps the most infamous psychological and medical experiment in American history, the Tuskegee study involved 600 African American men, 399 of whom had syphilis and 201 who did not. The men were told they were receiving free health care, but in reality, they were being observed to study the progression of untreated syphilis, even after penicillin became the standard treatment in the 1940s. The participants were denied access to it. The study continued for 40 years. Dozens died, and many infected their wives and children. This wasn't just unethical, it was systemic abuse. It led to a complete overhaul of research ethics and the formation of the National Research Act in 1974. But it also left behind a legacy of mistrust toward the medical system that continues to affect communities today. These 10 experiments weren't just unethical, they were horrifying. They manipulated trust, inflicted trauma, and crossed every conceivable moral line, all under the banner of science. Some of them reshaped how we understand human behavior, but at what cost? The lessons we learn from these dark chapters aren't just scientific, they're human. They remind us that curiosity must always be balanced with compassion, and that progress means nothing if we sacrifice dignity along the way. If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button. And for more deep dives into history, psychology, and science, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to uncover, some of it fascinating, some of it chilling, but all of it real. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.